Well, welcome to our attendees and folks on Facebook and YouTube as well. My name is Angel Bradford, and I am the president of the Biomedical Sciences Student Association here at Tulane School of Medicine. Welcome to COVID-19 Vaccines, Tools to Make a Decision, an interactive webinar where we will discuss the myths and the misconceptions and also answer your questions around the different COVID vaccines. And we definitely wanted a judgment-free zone, so feel free to add your question and answers. To add your questions to the question and answer section of this Zoom. And we'll also check it out on Facebook to see what the community is wondering. In addition to that, we want to make sure folks understand that this is an event that centers Black and Brown communities. And as you can see, our panelists are diverse and represent health professions as well as scientists. And so welcome, and we're gonna get started. So as I said before, my name is Angel, and I am from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I am a doctoral student in the Department of Physiology here at the School of Medicine. And my favorite dish from New Orleans, since we wanted to have a little fun with this, is gumbo. So of course, Louisiana is known for its gumbo, and that's my favorite. And if we would like, let's go ahead and have introductions from the panelists in whatever order that you like. Right after Tony and Jill, you might want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Angel. My name is Antoinette Bell Kareem. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate, along with Angel and Jill in the BMS program, studying West African viruses. Go ahead, Jill.
Thanks, Tony. My name is Mrna Vaccine. I am a student in the pathologist assistant program at the med school at Tulane. And I am interested in medical anthropology. In undergrad, I studied anthro, and I'm really interested in medical anthropology, and I'm really passionate. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background. But I'm really passionate about all kind of the intersection of healthcare and people and medicine and all of that. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And my favorite NOLA dish is probably jambalaya. So thanks, y'all. Honored to be here.
Dr. Perry, would you like to kick us off with introductions for our panelists?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Dr. Sylvia Perry. I'm a pharmacist of about 15 plus years, and I studied at Xavier University in New Orleans. I reside in Dallas, Texas, where I do pharmacy consulting, and I'm also on the front lines vaccinating people with the COVID vaccine. So I'm so happy to be here and having this discussion today. My favorite NOLA dish is any type of oyster. They're so good. So.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Julum Nwanze. I am from Nigeria, and I am a fourth-year pathology resident in Tulane University. And my favorite New Orleans dish is jambalaya. Although I actually prefer the Cajun jambalaya to the Creole jambalaya.
Hi, I'll jump in next. My name is Dr. Christopher Barnes. I'm currently a Howard Hughes Medical Institute actually postdoc at Caltech here in California, and soon to be assistant professor at Stanford, where I'll be starting my lab this summer in the biology department. My background is in structural biology, but recently I've been working to understand antibodies in HIV, which unfortunately affects the Black community in the United States the most. And now most recently against SARS-CoV-2. I grew up in the Carolinas, went to school at UNC Chapel Hill, then did my graduate work at University of Pittsburgh. My favorite dish probably has to be Creole crawfish etouffee. I have a friend that actually has a restaurant down New Orleans, and so yeah, that's one of my favorite dishes that she makes. So that's my go-to.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Ashley Queen. I am a microbiologist by training. My background is in infectious disease research as well as cancer and health disparities. As of recently, I serve as the director of microbiology and public health for the American Cleaning Institute. And I also serve as president for Queen Consulting Group and offering solutions in the business of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The current work that I do is help to inform the public about proper cleaning and sanitization guidelines. I'm working with regulatory agencies to try to prove the safety and efficacy of ingredients in cleaning, and then just working in support of public health and spreading public knowledge about infectious disease and what we can do to prevent it and help it prevent its spread.
All right, thank y'all so much. And now that I kind of got some of the jitters out, I forgot to say two things. So SARS-CoV-2 is like the scientific name for COVID-19 for folks that don't know. And I study cardiovascular disease and diabetes type 2. So with that being said, and all of our intros done, I'll start off our first question and then kick it over to Jill, who's going to take over with our discussion. And so just as you guys have been approaching the vaccine throughout the last couple of months with the development of the different vaccines, personally, not just as professionals, how have y'all been, and anyone can answer this question, how have you been approaching the vaccine, keeping in mind our family's responses, our community's responses to the vaccine? How has that affected your own decision?
Well, I'll go ahead. I've been keeping abreast of all the swift changes with the COVID-19 vaccine. And I've quite frankly been amazed at my colleagues in the science and technology realm for getting to this point so fast. So I wanted to be able to explain to my family and my friends, my community, what I understood to be happening and why it was happening at such a fast pace and why this is a good thing. And then also keeping in mind that this is all novel, all new. So really taking that approach to any conversation I have, that we are learning as we go, which is pretty common for science, but because this is happening at warp speed so fast, really being empathetic to a layperson just feeling like their head is spinning. So I'm an advocate for the vaccine. I discuss it whenever I can with my family and friends. And I've really been able to tease out some of those concerns and kind of been able to address them with the next person off the bat.
Okay, others, thank you.
I'll chime in. So to mirror what Dr. Perry said is that, I've just been following the progression of the disease over the past year, just learning more about its pathogenesis and how they affect our communities. And the main thing I've been doing is when people reach out to me, just giving them an understanding of how the virus works as far as what we know now and how its life cycle is, what things that we can do to prevent it. And as far as the vaccine, because these authorizations from the FDA are relatively new, prior to this point, you can't really advocate for something that's not available. But now that it's available, there's a ton of information flooding in, a ton of research studies. And for me personally, I'm just following the data, seeing where the studies are taking people, looking at the reactions. And I'm along with everyone else where I'm making a decision of when I think the vaccine would be appropriate and the best time for me to take it. And I just provide that information to others so they can make informed decisions. And I forgot to mention that jambalaya is my dish of choice.
Oh, yeah. And I appreciate y'all's distinct awareness of the difference between Creole and Cajun. So I'm impressed. Other folks that have gotten the vaccine, do you want to speak to your decision to go ahead and do that, other than the fact that some of y'all are healthcare workers, obviously?
Well, I knew right from a long time ago that once the vaccine was available, I was going to get it, just because my background is in pathology and we get to do autopsies. And I had like a personal experience, or I saw firsthand of what happened, the devastation in New Orleans when the virus hit in March. So as soon as the vaccine was being developed and I read about the technology being used for the vaccine and the processes that were being applied, I kind of was sold on the vaccine. So once it was available to us as medical doctors, I was one of the first to go ahead and take it. My personal experience was that it was really pretty straightforward. I got the shot on the arm. I didn't feel anything, but I am aware that people have experienced it in different ways. Some people have really felt some malaise, some people had fevers, some others had like really stiff arms for like a day or two. It generally is just the way our different bodies react to different things. It's not like we are the vaccine is killing you at that point in time. Everyone I know who had this personal experience, after like 24 to 36 hours, they all got better.
Yeah, and I'll finally say something. I have yet to get the vaccine, but once it's available to me, I definitely will. And I've encouraged my family to do it as well. And much like everyone else on this panel, I've really encouraged my family, explained in lay terms, basically, what's going on. So my work is more intimately involved in the development of, therapeutics and vaccines, working closely with the groups we work with across the country, across the world. Some of our antibodies are being moved into the market. And so we're also developing a vaccine, in our own lab. So we're well aware of, what goes into making a vaccine and what it's supposed to do. And so, a lot of my outreach has been to communicate to others what exactly is happening. Even though I'm a structural biologist, I'm surrounded by immunologists and virologists in my work. And we have weekly meetings that we go over the data. And so as papers come out at the rate they're coming out, it's a lot to keep up with. And so it's a lot for just the normal reporters or anyone to really keep up with. So it's really important to stay out in front as best you can with the data that's coming out and coming available to explain it. So, I think that's kind of what I've been doing, not only with my family, but, my friends and, who are scientists as well. And I think that's the key is like, talking to even scientists, they have questions. People that can read the literature have questions. So, it's really important to do these types of events to encourage those that, the vaccine is safe, it is very effective. And if you have the opportunity to receive the vaccine, I would definitely take the vaccine.
Thank you. Thank you all for your feedback and your insights. And I do want to highlight that I know a lot of folks are actually getting the vaccine. They're planning to get the vaccine. They're signing up. But for folks who are a little hesitant, feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A section, as I said before. And I'm going to turn over the first big meat and potatoes discussion questions to Jill.
Yes, thank you so much, Angel, and thank you everybody for your responses. So this first question is directed at Dr. Queen, excuse me, and it's basically a question that kind of gets down to the basics. So what does this virus do to our immune system, and how do the vaccines generally address this? Because there's more than one vaccine, so how do they all kind of work?
Okay, so that's such a complex yet could be simple, could not be simple question, but just to put it in general context, the coronavirus is a respiratory virus. So it attacks the cells of our respiratory system. So where it first infects in our nasal pathways, and it can make its way down to the lung tissue. And so when these vaccines are being developed, they're trying to find the best way to target the organism in a way that's very specific and intentional. And so in this case, right now, there are emergency use authorizations approved by the FDA for the use of the Pfizer and the Mrna vaccines. And these are the main ones we're hearing. But there are also vaccines that are still under study, still being discussed and released across different nations across the world. But within the United States, these two vaccines are the ones that are in use. And so a novel target for these vaccines that, has been under study for at least the past decade or so are mRNA vaccine. And mRNA is a nucleic acid or a genetic material. And so mRNA is what our cells use to encode proteins. And so when you take these vaccines contain a very specific region that when it's put inside the cell translates this into a protein that would produce a very small portion of what you call the viral spike protein. And this viral spike protein that gets pushed out to the cell, and on the outside of the cell, once it's produced, it kind of acts as a beacon. And then that beacon talks to our immune system, and our immune cells, they recognize, this is something foreign. This is something that's not right. And so our immune cells will take that, internalize that information, and basically package that and kind of have communications with other immune cells so that our body can start to build up an immune profile against this foreign pattern, this foreign protein. And so the intent is when you have these vaccines help your body to recognize this, and it starts a process of going from what we call innate immunity, which are natural cells that can recognize foreign invaders in the body, and that eventually will translate to active or adaptive immunity. And so adaptive immunity, that's when you start to see the interplay of like antibody responses, which I'm sure will be talked about in a little more detail later. But the intent of that is that in these cases with these vaccines, we have 2 doses, and that's based on the data that supports that in order to get an effective and robust immune response against an invading organism such as coronavirus, we need to challenge our body twice with these spike proteins, and then our body can build up that full robust defense. So when you're exposed to coronavirus, you may get a little ill, but your body has the equipment or the immune response ready to attack that organism and quickly knock it out of your system so that you don't have that strenuous disease process that comes along with being infected with coronavirus. And I can say that firsthand because I'm at home recovering from COVID right now. So yeah, it's a thing.
Thank you for that response. Does anybody else want to chime in?
I just want to say, oh, go ahead, Dr. Barnes.
No, you go ahead.
I just wanted to briefly say that was a great explanation. One thing I've heard in the various channels I've been in is that, oh, mRNA, it's going to get into your DNA and change your makeup. So that the way that this mRNA vaccine works, it does not get into the nucleus of the cell. It does not affect your DNA. So I just wanted to state that.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. So there's been talk about mRNA integrating into our bodies and becoming part of our, makeup, and that's not the case. These are being delivered inside the cell, not into the nucleus where your DNA material is, and then they're translating these proteins, right? These spike proteins. So if you look over my shoulder, this is a coronavirus, and these gray spikes right here are what are being made by mRNA. That's what they're encoding for, telling your body to make that so when they see it on the virus, they can recognize it and kill it right away. So yeah, that's a great explanation by Dr. Queen and Dr. Perry.
Thank y'all so much. Just kind of a follow-up question for you, Dr. Queen. You had mentioned how you need to get jabbed by the vaccine twice. Is that true for both of the vaccines currently available in the United States? And will that apply to the general public when the vaccines become available to them?
Yes, as it current stands, both vaccines require you to have 2 doses. They have different schedules in which those doses are supposed to be performed, I believe. Quote me if I'm wrong, Moderna's the second one's in 21 days and Pfizer's in 28 days, if I have that in the right order. But is it reversed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so it just depends on that particular formulation for that vaccine. And then this same vaccine, unless they make modified or make any changes, it's going to be the same concept once it's open to the general public, unless another vaccine is approved for emergency use that may have a different requirement.
I just want to chip in there. So currently, Tulane is actually partnering with Johnson & Johnson. They are doing a phase 3 trial for their own vaccine. Now, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is actually an adenovirus-based vaccine. So it's kind of similar to what AstraZeneca and University of Oxford did. But the thing about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that it's actually a one-jab vaccine. They are currently in phase 3. So far, they've had very good results. I think the current trial states they're about 90%, between 80 to 90% efficacy. But we'll see what it's going to be eventually when they get authorized to be used. But the schedule for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine seems to be a one-jab vaccine, one shot, and that's all.
Okay, great. Thank you all for your for answering that question and chipping in and all your comments. I'm going to hand it off to Tony to ask the next question.
Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. Also, I definitely forgot, I am from Louisiana. And my favorite dish, I know she's still on here because she hasn't went to bed yet, is my mom's etouffee, crawfish etouffee. It is the best. I don't care what anybody else says. Sorry, Dr. Barnes. Yes, so this next question goes to Dr. Barnes. He's the antibody guy for right now. So we talk about antibodies. Can you explain in layman terms what antibodies are? And then can you kind of infer about what the antibody retention is when we're talking about these vaccines?
Yeah, I mean, so I think Dr. Queen kind of set up what happens with the vaccine and what happens, in response to actual infection. So there's two lines of defense in infection, right? So your first initial response, the innate immune response, that's just your body innately going with these cells, targeting anything they consider to be invaders, and they just knock them out. But over time, in about 7 to 10 days, you begin to develop a very specific response, and that is your adaptive immunity. And that, is when your antibodies start to get made. And so antibodies are nothing more than proteins found within your blood, within your mucosal layer, that are very specific to a certain antigen, or in this case, the virus. And so with these, there's 5 different types of antibodies, but when you hear about antibodies, usually in the media, they're talking about a very specific antibody called the IgG. You don't need to know the nomenclature, but this antibody is really what is, very specific, and this is what is over my shoulder again. So these little green and pink and different colored proteins targeting the spike, they're very specific to the spike itself. And because of this specificity, right, it can hone in on the virus and kill it without much side effects. And so when you think about antibodies, either elicited by a vaccine or by a natural infection, as that protein is being presented, like as the vaccine is making that spike protein to present on your cell, your body is making these antibodies, which is why you get some of these side effects after getting jabbed, right? You get the headache, the fever. That's your body's response to start making these proteins. And so when you have these antibodies floating around, they can go and target it. But once the antibody, or once the virus is cleared from your body, of course, the antibodies start to go down. And this is natural, right? You don't want to continue to make a protein if that protein is just floating around doing nothing, right? You don't want to use energy to make something that your body doesn't need. And so what happens over time, the antibodies begin to wane and they begin to go down. So you maybe remember back in March and April, when they were talking about people, when they received or were infected, how long were they going to be protected, right? How long could I walk around and be protected from maybe another infection? And we're still early in this. Like, we don't know the durability, the long-term durability of the antibody response, either from natural infection or from the vaccine. But what we can say is that, so far 6 months out, our group, as well as others, have followed up on people who have been vaccinated and people who have been infected, and we can still see antibodies present that are very specific to this spike protein, right, to the virus. And so that's really, that's really promising. And then what's more important to that is that the cells, right, the cells that actually make these antibodies, they're called memory B cells, okay? These memory cells are persistent. They're not going away. And that is really, really important when you think about long-term durability. So your memory response is really what helps you recover faster upon re-exposure of a virus, right? So you may, know that, people say, oh, you can't get sick twice from a cold or something like that. That's because you have a memory response that kicks in and helps, prevent you from getting sicker the second time around. And so that memory response is really what's important for a vaccine. And we're hoping that the memory persists long enough that we don't need to continually get, a shot every once in a while. But we don't know. Right now we're just beginning to find out what that response looks like. So far it looks good. But, we're only, 6 to, 8 months removed from the initial subjects in the clinical trials receiving these vaccines. So time will tell, but so far so good.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. Does anybody else have any input on that question? Okay, you did a
Well,
great job. Oh, continue.
no, let me just follow up. I mean, so I've been looking at the Q&A, and right now,
Yeah.
of course, there's a lot of talk about these variants that are circulating, and there's a cause for concern if the vaccine is going to work. And so, you know, our paper actually just got picked up by news media talking about, you know, our results. So recently, we looked at people who have received both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, and we looked at the response. And what we can say, and this is, you know, for everyone to know, what we can say is that yes, there is a reduction in the response, but you have a cushion, right? The response that you elicit is so high from these vaccines after you get your second doses, right? The response is so robust that, you know, that small reduction that we are seeing is real. You see a reduction, but that still gives you so much cushion to actually attack and target the virus, right? So far, both these mRNA vaccines, as well as, don't know too much yet about the AstraZeneca vaccine, but we assume it will be the same thing. They are effective against the circulating variants. And so that's really important to say, is that, you know, these are so far being effective. Some of the monoclonal antibody treatments, some are effective, but some, you know, less so. So, you know, but there's plenty of antibodies that we've discovered that can be used for therapies. So now it's just a matter of choosing the right ones to move into the clinic with.
Thank you. Yeah, that was probably definitely going to be a later question, but I'm glad you clicked that off perfectly. If not, I'll then pass the baton to Angel.
Yeah. All right. So this one's for Dr. Nwanze. What are the top 3 myths that you're hearing either about the vaccine or about COVID? And then how are you tackling? And I know this is your bread and butter because Jill raved about it. So feel free to detail.
Okay, I can actually go on for days talking about these myths because there are so many. First, they have actually addressed one here, talking about like mRNA affecting your DNA, and I like the fact they addressed that. That is patently false. So far, the ones that we're hearing, first of all, people are saying that the vaccine is unsafe because it was developed too quickly. But what we all need to realize is that a lot of resources from both the public and private partnerships were moved to developing this vaccine. People don't realize that the mRNA vaccine technology and the recombinant vector vaccine technology, which AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are actually based on, this technology has actually been there since the 1990s. It's just that they haven't been directed towards vaccine development. Let me not say vaccine development, they've been targeted more towards cancer vaccine development. Now, for example, the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik vaccine, it was actually being used for it was being targeted towards the Ebola virus, but when COVID struck, they just repurposed it for the COVID virus. And it's kind of the same thing with the mRNA vaccine. So that's one of the reasons why it was faster to push out this vaccine. And another thing people need to realize is that no shortcuts were actually taken during the clinical trials. Pfizer, for example, enrolled about 43,000 people. And for you to get an EUA issued by the FDA, you have to have followed at least half of that cohort for a minimum of 2 months. Pfizer did that and they were satisfied with their results. A third thing also, like I said earlier, is that vaccine manufacturing is a costly process, and governments around the world, together with these big pharmaceutical companies, they got together and provided the finances to cover the vaccine manufacturing. So that is one of the reasons why it's a process that usually takes 7 to 10 years took less than 1 year. Also, another big myth that is circulating around is the fact that this, well, I don't want to use the word fact, but people are saying that the vaccine makes people infertile or it affects fertility. And the reason why this came about is because there was a rumor on social media that the spike protein on the COVID vaccine, something similar to what Dr. Barnes has as his background, there was a rumor that it's the same spike protein as what helps the placenta attach to the attach during implantation in pregnancy, and that if you take the vaccine is going to attack that spike protein and you will not be able to give birth. That is patently false, because during the Pfizer trials, 23 of the participants that were enrolled actually got pregnant. And unfortunately, the one person that had a miscarriage was in the placebo group. So there is no evidence whatsoever that the COVID vaccine or even COVID virus itself affects fertility. People have had COVID even while pregnant, before being pregnant, and they've given birth to very healthy babies. Some of them have had COVID also, some of them have not. There are currently studies looking at the effects of COVID-19 virus in the placenta. So there really is no evidence out there to support this myth, but it still keeps on circulating, and it's been very difficult to shut down. And then the third one I would like to highlight is one I just find so preposterous. It's basically the fact that the whole COVID pandemic is a ruse, and it was just developed by entities out there to make sure everyone gets a microchip implanted in the form of the virus, and it's part of the new one world order to control everyone. And I don't even know where to start with this, because it came about because I think sometime in the past, Bill Gates talked about people having a digital vaccine certificate, and someone just picked on that and they ran with it. Also, it's been linked to the whole 5G technology, that 5G technology is basically what is being put there to spread COVID. And it's become so dangerous that in the United Kingdom, 5G masts were actually burned down because people really believed this rumor. And it's just a conspiracy theory that has gone out of hand. There have been videos on YouTube that have been taken down about it, and it just keeps on spreading. But there's no evidence whatsoever about it. It's been difficult to this particular rumor has been difficult to control, and it's just right from the start patently false. Another thing I would like to say about this rumor is that this rumor is a rumor that has been recycled time and time again. It's kind of like a mix of Big Brother is watching you versus the mark of the beast being put in you. So even during when the Affordable Care Act was about to be rolled out, there were rumors that, oh, once you get the Affordable Care Act, you are going to be given a number, and that was the mark of the beast. So it's very similar to these rumors that we're hearing now. And it's anytime there's a new technology or there's something like that, there are always people that would take advantage of that situation to spread these conspiracy theories. In terms of tackling it, conspiracy theories are really, really difficult to shut down because they are self-propagating. So the more you try to shut them down, the more the conspiracy theorists say, hey, they are trying to shut me down because they know I am telling the truth. So there isn't really any perfect way. But what I would say is that it is imperative for scientists and governments to be perfectly open with the public, with their citizens, telling them, hey, this is what is happening, even when there's a mistake, to openly admit it, because that one little zip of information that you think it's unimportant can actually be weaponized to start a very dangerous conspiracy theory. Yeah.
How do you, and thank you so much, that was wonderful. And I know we gotta stop saying thank you all the Louisiana niceties every 5 seconds, but I was gonna ask you as a follow-up, how do you suggest that folks sift through the conspiracy theories? How do people get to the truth when we have so much information from so many different sources? How do you, kind of process that?
Unfortunately, the best way to still get to the truth is to listen to designated authorities, because people need to realize that even though this science that we have is imperfect, it has gotten us so far in civilization. We have the best in terms of life expectancy right now. Science has provided so much in terms of technology and development. So there's no need really to distrust it, because if you look through the past, there's always been this mistrust of science, but science has always come true. And like Dr. Perry said earlier, the problem that we're having right now, why these conspiracy theories are propagating so fast, is that people are actually seeing science evolve in real time. We never get to actually see the trials and the errors that happen. And that's what science is. It's all about trial and error. But because we are trying so hard to control this pandemic in real time, we're actually making mistakes as we go along, and we're learning from these mistakes. So if you look at throughout the whole pandemic, even the instructions given by the CDC has changed time and time again. It's because they are learning. Same thing with the WHO also. So we just need to believe and trust in these age-old institutions that somehow, through their mistakes, have always gotten it right eventually.
Yeah. All right. The next question is for Dr. Perry by Jill.
Yes, it is. So this question, honestly, who's paying for all this? Who's paying for and funding these vaccines? And who's supporting this research and development? And what does that process even look like? And on top of that, sorry, Dr. How do we sorry, go ahead.
I'm listening. What was on
Okay,
top of
part two of this question. How do we normalize vaccines in the same way that people trust the medications that they take? You know, how do we trust the government and actually take these vaccines?
Okay, I'm going to try to break this down. So it was kind of already hinted towards this vaccine, and the testing has been a great partnership between private and public corporations. So the government, along with private citizens, universities, corporations, have all pitched in to fund the research for this vaccine. I think I read this, it's been a while, Dolly Parton even chipped in for some of the research for this vaccine. So a diverse group of people, a diverse group of companies, and our government, along with the governments around the world, have all chipped in to develop these vaccines and the research to get the vaccines to where we are today, where we're able to give them to the public. Remind me of the second part before the last part of your question, Jill.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, second part of the question, how do we normalize these vaccines in the same way that, you know, medications are normalized?
I think the beauty of, and thank you for repeating it, the beauty of what we have seen over the last year is that it really has been a transparent process that makes it look more clunky and not sleek and well designed and rolled out, and we don't have the beautiful packaging that our new medicine comes in. But because the process has been so transparent, we've had a lot more engagement, and those questions and fears and concerns can come to the forefront now, and we can address those. I think there has to be a little bit of level setting. Science is about trial and error. It is imperfect. It is learn as we go. So I think that's why the science community has had a lot of grace with the public, because we are learning as we go with the disease, with the vaccine. So the more information that we have now, as long as we continue to be transparent, I think that will help normalize vaccines, and then the COVID vaccine in general. And I think we have to think about and do a little bit of history work on vaccines. I know there have been times in American history where people that look like us were not treated right by the medical community. But if you look to, I think the 80s, 90s, the 2000s, vaccines in this country have been very safe, well thought out, well planned out, and well tested. So there's a lot of research behind that. So we have to acknowledge the wrongs of the medical community to minority communities in the past, but also look at the progress and where we've come from. And we have this diverse group of scientists that are working on the COVID vaccine, interpreting these studies, and are volunteering to take it as well. So I think we all just have to take a minute to ask the questions, be available to answer the questions, and also have a little bit of grace with everyone because this is so new.
What a great response. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tony?
Just a slide follow-up question, Dr. Perry, for that. We had a Facebook question asked about, which I've seen on Facebook in general, our social media asking about people taking vitamin D or aspirin or some type of supplement to like help aid in your defense system. Have you heard about any of those extra supplements, or can you speak on that?
Yeah, all of those have been popular. I know the vitamin D, the aspirin, and the zinc. Melatonin, I would need to do a little bit more research on how that helps fight a COVID infection. There was a correlation between people with low vitamin D and getting affected or having a worse symptoms after they were infected. That was a small study, so we need more information. But in general, vitamin D is something that we are very deficient in, so there could be something to that. And over-the-counter vitamin D is not going to cause you any harm if you take it at what's recommended on the bottle. So that could be a very accessible way to help boost not getting the COVID vaccine. Baby aspirin, I can see the correlation. A lot of times what we're seeing with people that have gotten past the active COVID infection is they'll start throwing clots. So, a baby aspirin could kind of maybe help keep your blood thin. So that's a possibility. I don't know that you need to go start a baby aspirin. This is something you would need to talk with your personal physician about. So I can see how maybe that started to get popular on social media, but I don't necessarily recommend that you go out and start that therapy. And then zinc as well can help kind of boost your immune system. I have seen positive reports about that. So the vitamin D, the zinc, I think would be fine. The baby aspirin, that's a conversation that you need to have with your healthcare team. And then the melatonin, it probably wouldn't hurt, but I haven't seen anything that directly relates it to positive outcomes after a COVID infection.
Thank you. All right, so we will switch gears and speak with Dr. Queen. So our question, since your work is based on like sanitation, disinfecting and everything like that, what role does sanitation, disinfecting have in this pandemic and just in this conversation in general?
Well, in general, when it comes to infectious disease or just control of infection, it's very, very important to make sure that you're ensuring your home environment, your work environment, and just your personal hygiene is kept up at a standard. And I think this is a time in the world as a microbiologist, which is really exciting, but you never hear people talking about cleaning and being healthy and mindful of those things as much as you have during this pandemic. Something that people should understand that when it comes to cleaning, say, any surface, you have to remember if there's debris on the surface, the first thing you ever want to do is make sure you remove the debris before you clean, because that debris, that organic material, it can block your disinfectants that you're using from able to effectively cleanse that surface. So you always want to remove the debris first, and then you can apply your disinfectant. And you always want to make sure that you're following the guidelines on the label. I know a lot of times somebody will spray down a counter, and as soon as they spray it, they'll just wipe it down. But there's a certain level of contact time that certain disinfectants require. And unbeknownst to many people, there's a lot of resources out there that can guide you to the best disinfectants to use, approved disinfectants, and you can find things like that on the EPA's website. And the EPA also has products on there that are very specific to products that have been approved for the use to destroy coronavirus. So that's something that people should look in. Just Google EPA approved listing or virus products that kill coronavirus. And then also there are topical antiseptics that also can be used to help to reduce organisms on your skin if you don't have access to soap and water. Some examples of those are ethanol. A lot of sanitizers seen in the store have ethanol as main ingredients, or benzalkonium chloride or benzethonium chloride. There's other products that are under FDA's purview, and that's providone iodine, chlorxylenol, also known as PCMX. Um, and like, you want to be mindful of what's in your products, read the labels and make sure you follow the instructions. I know a lot of companies have kind of stepped in to pump up the availability of hand sanitizer since the pandemic, because there's been such a shortage, because everyone is being very mindful of their cleaning practices. So you just want to make sure that there's lists on the FDA site for some of the companies that were having challenges where they were finding methanol inside their products. Many companies out here, they've been producing these products under FDA's peer review for years, but some of these companies are kind of new and may not understand all the processes and refinements that are required to make sure that these products are pure. So just to be mindful of that. And again, the number one way to prevent the spread of germs, of course, is to wash your hands with soap and water. My company's website, cleaninginstitute.org, it has a ton of information on there on how to properly clean, sanitize your home, all different strategies, very easy to understand, nothing complicated. And just to bear things like that in mind, because if you're sick and you're not cleaning around yourself or your environment regularly, then you're providing an opportunity to host organisms that can make yourself sick and others sick in your home and surrounding areas.
Thank you. And thank you earlier for telling us about your story that you're currently powering through. We know you're going to be great after this with COVID. You'll have a story to tell, as my mom says, a testimony. So a follow-up question, maybe two. So also, as a microbiologist in training, we usually go with the idea of 3 pumps and wash, even before the pandemic, and meaning, oh, I've used sanitizer 3 times, I need to wash my hands for sure after the 3rd time. Do you think that has changed any bit? Personally, of course, yes. But I mean, do you think it has changed now that we're in a pandemic? And also the idea of using this amount of antiseptic or Germ-X, are we possibly causing something in the future with like pathogens that will become resistant to antiseptics and stuff like that?
So there's always ongoing studies about seeing if cleaning products or products used for sanitizers have some type of emerging um, response where no longer they lose their efficacy in the presence of different microorganisms. And then I know there are certain ingredients that have since been banned that have demonstrated that the organisms can develop some type of resistance towards it. But currently, the organisms that were considered under FDA's monograph, which is now starting to go under reform under the new CARES Act, these ingredients are presently continually being supported by data that show that they are effective against these organisms, and that there's no data supporting that these organisms are developing resistance against them. Now, when it comes to washing your hands, the most important thing is, for whatever product you're using, a hand soap, that you just want to make sure that you wet your hands thoroughly, allow your hands to be completely lathered. And it's not necessarily about, how many pumps you use, it's just making sure your hands are completely lathered and that you're properly washing your palms in between your fingers and your nails. And there's different songs that you can sing, just to make sure that you're washing your hands for an appropriate amount of time, just like basic things you can keep in mind. But what was the other question?
I actually have that was it, but I have a follow-up to the follow-up.
Okay.
Someone asked, now that we're all using hand sanitizers in the grocery stores and everything, like, is it becoming excessive as a society of hand washing and trying to be super clean? Let me see what the question is. Do we need to be washing our groceries and bags as we're coming in? Is that too excessive? When is the limit of sanitation that we can kind of feel okay with?
And Tony, if to provide a little better context, I can see the full question here because I know you're going between screens. It was more so saying, now that we know COVID is shared mostly through respiratory droplets, basically where does that line stop of like excessive cleaning? We saw folks like washing their groceries and letting them sit out for 3 days and sanitizing all the things. Like, have you found a balance with like that respiratory theory of COVID being transmitted versus like the excessive cleaning?
Okay, well, one thing to keep in mind is that I wouldn't say that there's such thing as being excessive. You just have to be mindful of your behaviors when you're cleaning. Like if you're using hand sanitizer all the time, you have to remember that if it's, say, for example, if it's alcohol based, that can be drying. So you want to make sure you're still moisturizing your skin, because your skin is one of your primary barriers for immune defense. So you want to make sure that you're still taking care of your skin and protecting those barriers. When it comes to cleaning, like say you order your groceries in or just bring them home from the grocery store, it never hurts to wipe down your grocery, because even though the focus of our minds right now is COVID, there still are tons of other microorganisms out there. So it's not a bad practice to have to wipe down your things when you return from the store. But you have to be mindful that, if you come home with a melon, you don't necessarily have to sit there and clean it and bleach. Like you just want to make sure that you're, thoroughly rinsing off your produce, and you're not using substances that are not supposed to be ingested. Like I guess a good rule of thumb is, if you're not supposed to use it on your skin, you probably shouldn't wash your food with it. And you just want to keep in mind that, so you're not unnecessarily exposing yourselves to chemicals that you're not supposed to ingest. And when you are cleaning countertops or children's toys and utensils, and you do happen to spray them down with one of those disinfectants, just make sure you're rinsing them with water so that you're not ingesting things. And please don't inject anything in your veins, because that's not going to work. And it's happened before, but I just want to say it again, just in case somebody's getting a bright idea. Don't do it.
Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Anybody else? Yeah.
Sorry,
Angela,
I didn't know if we want to.
I
I want to be mindful of time, and we have a ton of questions. So I'm going to skip the next, Jill and Tony, I'm going to skip the next 3 questions and jump to the last 3 so we can get to pure audience questions. One of the kind of like, and this is discussive, it's open format, so anyone can respond. But like kind of the higher level question is, how should we be talking about equity around vaccine distribution, not just in America, but within the international context? Have y'all given thought to that?
So that is really a huge issue. And I'll tell you why, because even in the distribution of the vaccines in the United States, it's come out that certain communities that are not being hit with COVID as hard are getting more of the vaccines as compared to communities that are really hit with COVID really hard. So you can see like there isn't equitable distribution of the vaccine in the United States. Now, going to the international context, a couple of days ago, the head of the WHO, the Secretary General of the WHO, came out and talked about a moral failure on the part of the developed world in vaccine distribution. And that's because the vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, and I think AstraZeneca's vaccines have been bought up by most of the developed world. So it leaves the developing world to feed on scraps. Right now, what we're just saying is a case of survival of the fittest. Everyone wants to take care of their own citizens and isn't really concerned about other countries. But the thing about it is that eventually there has to be a blending point. There has to be a breaking point in which every country will get the vaccine available to them. I don't know when. I do like the fact that as of today, the United States rejoined the WHO. I do like the fact that the United States, as of today, decided to actually come up with a plan that will help with the distribution of vaccines to the rest of the world. And why that is important is that the United States is still the lead voice when it comes to any issue in the world. And when they can make it happen, then the rest of the world will follow. So it definitely is important that that conversation needs to be had.
Thank you.
And Dr. Barnes, I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, kind of tongue in cheek, but going back to the safety, this kind of ties into it. But the idea that is, there's differences in which communities are receiving the vaccines. Just let you know right there that it's probably safe when you have rich folks jumping over poor folks to get the vaccine, so they can return back to their life. That lets you know that they understand that this is a commodity that needs to be had, and the developed world understands this is a commodity that needs to be had. So therefore, they're buying up and leaving poor folks in underdeveloped countries to fight it out for themselves. So I mean, that kind of points to the fact that this is safe and right and is needed. But to the point of how do we make it more equitable? I mean, I think that comes to what you're going to see over this year, which is continued development of new vaccines that are cheaper to make, easier to, on the cold chain supply line, right? One of the problems with the Pfizer vaccine, obviously, is its storage and having to store it at the temperatures it requires. That becomes a huge issue when you're trying to reach, rural villages in places in Southeast Asia and Africa that don't have these types of, capacities. And just based off our work in HIV, we understand these closed supply lines and what it takes. So luckily, the AstraZeneca vaccine, which hasn't been approved yet for EUA here in the United States, it can be stored at regular refrigeration. And so that is going to be, a huge deal moving forward when you're trying to vaccinate the world's population. But yeah, unfortunately, right, the only about 10% best estimate of the world would be vaccinated this year. And that's not a lot. So yeah, that's 700 million people, maybe more, but that's not a lot. So we have a long way to go before this virus has been eradicated worldwide.
Wow. And what's EUA?
Emergency Use Authorization.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that in terms of the AstraZeneca vaccine, they actually did something that was remarkable. They refused to patent their vaccine. So because they didn't patent their vaccine, companies in India are able to reproduce the vaccine. And when that happens, it makes the vaccine cheaper. Because currently, right now, the Pfizer vaccine, for example, is, I think in the United States, it was bought at about $20 a piece for each vaccine. When the EU negotiated their vaccine deal with Pfizer, they negotiated for $14. But most countries in the world still can't afford that. Unfortunately, Pfizer and Moderna refused to. They patented their vaccine, so no one can copy it for the next couple of years. So I have to give kudos to AstraZeneca that they were forward thinking and saying, okay, this is actually something that is for the good of mankind, for the good of the world, and we're actually not going to patent it. So other people can copy it and reproduce it. And hopefully we'll see it being distributed to other places, hopefully before the end of the year.
Yeah, in addition to AstraZeneca, there's other companies. And I think this was where philanthropic companies or people come into play. So as much as Bill Gates gets harped on, he has put close to $1 billion worth of money towards vaccine design for COVID. And so any product that is licensed under Gates Foundation money is free to the world. That is their agreement. And I think you're going to see this same with some of the other tech companies and philanthropic organizations, where any money that's used to make product, is now able to be distributed worldwide. So I mean, that will help. But again, the platforms that are currently being used were owned by companies, and so that takes time to overcome those hurdles. But some of these protein-based vaccines, they're being funded are in phase trials now. When they, show that they're safe and effective, they'll be cheaper to make and they'll probably be easy to license worldwide.
All right, thank y'all for that. I'm gonna hop in and ask the next question, and it kind of goes along with this whole, oh, this is a long haul. I think all of us realize at this point, almost a year in, that this is something that's taken a long time, and this is something that's going to take a long time, and it's something that has definitely changed the way that we live. But in terms of the future, in terms of when all of this is finally over and vaccines are, you know, internationally well distributed, what do we envision vaccine requirements will look like? Will this be like other vaccines that are required, you know, to get shots when you're a baby, to get shots for certain professions, employees of certain sectors, children in school? Do we envision that the coronavirus vaccine will be one of those required shots? And this is open to anybody to answer.
I'll go ahead and start. I feel like this is one of those things where, depending on how this virus evolves over time, how people respond to it, as more people become infected as well as vaccinated, and we see how the population responds to it, I think that will be the driving force into whether they try to make this a part of a required vaccine program. Like, for example, the flu vaccine is required. You're not going to be refused to be able to go to school if you don't have the flu vaccine, but other vaccines, you know, are part of that panel process. I feel like, as with any vaccine, people should not be deprived their rights that they normally have if they do not want to take the vaccine for religious purposes or other health choices that they make. But I can see there's a possibility there, but I think it's a little premature to make that assertion of whether it's going to be a requirement.
And with that, I think there are different levels. In a private corporation, they can make their own rules. I think a government requirement, I think it's premature, like Dr. Queen said. But for healthcare workers, for some types of travel, there may be certain restrictions that come into play sooner than later.
Yeah, I hear that. I do know that across the pond, abroad, there's all this talk about a vaccine passport and how you can't travel to certain places unless you've been vaccinated. So that might be something that plays into that discussion as well. But unless anybody has any comments about that, I'll let the next question be asked. Thanks, y'all.
To be honest, a vaccine passport it's not something that is new. So for example, I can tell you that for the longest time, you couldn't come from Nigeria to the United States without a yellow fever card. They would absolutely not let you board. So depending on how this plays out, I foresee a situation where that might come into play. I don't want to use the word vaccine passport, but I foresee a situation where governments will decide that, okay, to come into our country, you need to show proof that you've been vaccinated against this disease. And depending on also if the vaccine is going to be something that is one and done, by that I mean if you get it and you're immunized for life, or you have to be getting it annually, like the flu vaccine, it will determine a lot of things, whether it's going to be on the immunization schedule of many countries, or if it's just a vaccine that you get by choice. So like they said, it's a bit premature to say, okay, we're going to require it, but my gut feeling is that, yeah, we will require it for a while.
Yeah, I'll just quickly chime in. I think, as everyone has pointed out, this is kind of premature because we don't know how long the memory is going to be. And I think also as you move forward and develop new therapies, things that really decrease the fatality rate of this virus, then that changes things. So if you can make medicines that completely decrease fatality to be less than the common flu, seasonal flu, then that's a huge difference. Whereas if it continues to drift and becomes more virulent and more increases the fatality rate, then I could see where countries will require you to show proof of vaccine in order to enter their country and not burden their citizens with a deadly virus. So yes, I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that come into play before that can even be discussed. But this is not new, and so you'll probably see it for sure.
All right. We are going to switch to Q&A, purely questions from the attendees and then from Facebook. And it's kind of a rapid round, so anyone just hop right in, and we're going to try and prevent too many pauses in between. And Tony, do you want to start us off?
Yes. So question from Facebook asks, do cloth masks really help, such as bandanas? I feel surgical masks and N95s are best, but just asking about homemade masks and, adding filters. What's the best possible mask out there if you can't get N95s? Because at the height of the pandemic, they were really hard to get.
Rapid answer, yes. Any mask on your face works. Any protection is going to work to help prevent the spread of viral droplets. Obviously, having surgical masks, work probably a little bit better than cloth masks, but anything on your face is going to be helpful.
Thanks. Angel?
Yeah, so from Michael on Facebook, sorry, Michael, if you didn't want your name used. I read today that the Pfizer and Moderna will provide coverage for the new strains of COVID. True. I'm guessing he means variants, not strains, but I could be wrong. So do you want to speak to either? And can anybody tell us the difference between variants and strains? Because obviously that keeps coming up.
Yeah, so again, the what he's talking about is a paper that we just published along with another group in South Africa that just published another paper that's being picked up. So the short answer is yes. Vaccines will protect against these new variants. And so the difference between variants and strains, that's a semantic type of thing, but that's something that virologists debate when it becomes a new strain versus a variant of the original strain. So, I think we're still debating as scientists what to call it. But for now, we stick to variant of the parent, strain that originated. But short answer, the antibodies. So what we just checked and what the others have checked are nothing more than just the antibodies. So these serum proteins that are specific to the spike. So yes, we see a reduction, but there's still enough of a response to protect, against, to treat or to clear out the virus. No one has even looked at the T cell response, these other types of responses that your immune system uses to clear you from virus. And most likely those responses are going to be, just as potent. So, it's more than just a one size fits all when it comes to immunity. But so far the data from our group, from a group in South Africa and from Pfizer themselves show that, against these variants from the UK and South Africa, it is still effective.
Okay, great. I'm gonna go on and ask another question from one of the attendees. This question intrigues me and I'm interested for the answer. I don't know how well the panelists can answer because it might be a clinician question, but let's all take a shot at it. A study at the University of Minnesota concluded that CPR did not prevent mortality for COVID patients. Given the risk to EMT workers who attempt CPR, is it ethical to conclude to not attempt CPR on a COVID individual experiencing cardiac emergency? That's a big ethical question. Anybody who wants to answer it?
So I think the general teaching is that if you believe someone has a respiratory infection, you do not do the complete CPR, which is basically the chest pumps and the kiss of life. You try and do the chest pumps. And one thing about EMTs is that they actually have equipment to do the chest pumps without doing the doing the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. So I think the EMT will find a way of still trying to do some form of CPR, even though if it's a modified form. Also, I believe that the EMT guys have a defibrillator in in their cars. So if they have a defibrillator, they can actually use that if someone is having a cardiac arrest. That is actually better than just the regular CPR that we do.
All right, another question. Does the vaccination prevent you from getting COVID?
Sorry?
Oh, yes. Does the vaccine prevent you from getting COVID?
I believe the vaccine should prevent you from having the manifestations of infection of COVID. Yeah, so in terms of the disease, the vaccine should prevent to a great extent of you getting the disease. But currently, the debate is, can you still spread the infection even though you've been vaccinated? And the answer has not been fully given yet. So that's why there's still that recommendation that even though you've been vaccinated, you should still wear a mask.
And I just wanted to chime in. It is 2 doses, like we said, of the mRNA vaccines that have been approved. You don't reach that full 94, 95% till around a week or so after your last dose. So you won't be fully protected. And I think the goal initially was to reduce the negative outcomes of a COVID infection and death. So that's the main focus. And then I wanted to just mention that no corners were cut bringing these vaccines to market. I know we throw around that emergency use authorization, the EUA, but the same vaccine trials and processes were taken. We're just at that last stage, the phase 4, where we're still learning more and gathering data. If you have been vaccinated, I've had my first dose, there's a lot more resources for you to report. Oh, today you can get a text and say, today I had a headache, my arm is still hurting, or all those things, because we want to gather all that information so that we could give you a more robust idea of what can happen after the side effects of the vaccine after you get it. So I think that's an important point, that people sometimes feel like this was rushed to market, and that's one of the biggest barriers to people embracing this vaccine. But no, the same process was followed. We just were able to accelerate it because the technology and the science was there.
And to add to Dr. Perry, also the money was there. And I think that's a huge thing that a lot of people overlook about the speed at which you can get a vaccine to market. All these vaccines were done at risk, which means that companies paid for them before they knew they were going to work. And that is a huge risk for a company. Pfizer, for instance, paid $2 billion in order to start manufacturing their vaccine before clinical trials began. As a company, you don't want to pay $2 billion not knowing whether or not your product is going to work and if it's going to go to market. So the fact that this money was there, and because of the huge health concern that COVID is, that is one reason why these vaccines have come a lot faster, where you're not waiting around. I mean, the process is the same. It's just that the money has been there. You're not having to raise money, talk to venture. It's there, and that's a huge, huge thing. But back to the original question, just to reiterate, the vaccines were the endpoint. So what they were testing, right, was whether or not you got sick. The vaccines prevent you from getting sick, severe COVID, keeping you out of the hospital, keeping you without symptoms. Transmission, we don't know. It's likely that it helps reduce transmission, but it most likely does not prevent you from transmitting the virus to others. So my answer to this question to everyone is assume that you can still transmit the virus despite having your vaccine, because you want to protect your family members, protect your friends who have not been vaccinated, who are still susceptible to the severe COVID infection. So please continue to wear your mask even after being vaccinated until enough of us are vaccinated, which again won't happen for probably another year. So.
And I just want to quickly add, just to make it clear, that these vaccines are authorized under EUAs, which are emergency use authorizations. And this is the agency's way, the FDA's way of being able to allow medical professionals and pharmaceutical companies to be able to develop these drugs and administer those to in the population who are at risk. So the reason why that is what allows these vaccines to be on the market right now. There is a normal approval process that you would expect with the FDA, and that's why I think people are so confused as to how these vaccines are out so soon, and it's because they're under the EUA authorization.
Thank you. Another quick round question for people who have already had COVID-19, is it advantageous? Would you suggest them getting the vaccine if they have the availability to get the vaccine?
The short answer to that is yes. And the reason is because there have been studies where people who have had COVID-19 previously in the past developed the infection again. So COVID, unfortunately, is not a one and done disease. You can actually get reinfected again. I know there are other viruses that once you get them, you don't get them again. COVID, unfortunately, isn't one of them. So to everyone out there, if you have the ability to get the vaccine, even if you've had COVID, please go ahead and get the vaccine.
Thanks.
All right, so this is a really good question. I think we all hear it all the time. Well, we all have this experience. So I have heard other health professionals, and here's the question. I've heard other health professionals say that COVID is not as bad as blank, which we have had for many years. Also, a lot of medical professionals are saying no to the vaccine as well. What do y'all say about this?
I would say COVID is as bad as blank, if not worse. I mean, I think the data is clear. This is not flu. In my home state of North Carolina, for instance, they have more deaths from COVID in just this last, 9 months, whatever, than they had from the flu for the last 5 years or something along those lines. And so, I mean, this shows you that, this is not a normal type of outbreak that you experience seasonally. This is a pandemic. This is real. And so the precautions that are being asked of us is for a reason, because we don't have protection. And as you see right now, our hospitals are over flooded, and there was 4,500 deaths yesterday. I mean, I think we're just getting numb to these numbers. But 4,500 deaths happened just yesterday. Another 4,500 will likely happen today. I mean, that's just crazy. So yes, this is real, and it requires, the attention that we're giving it to help prevent the spread.
Yes. Also, I'll add, well, two things. One being, I know we're not going to get to all the questions because we end in like 12 minutes, y'all, but we can talk about maybe a follow-up webinar another time if you guys have the time and the space for that. But I would say, because this has come up a lot with folks that I work with, I generally advise people to talk to the experts of that field. So if we're talking infectious disease, you need to talk to people that actually have had COVID patients, which is not every specialty. And medical professionals are not a monolith. We're going to have opinions. Or if they're going to have, opinions, they may be political, etc. Make sure you're talking to the experts when you're asking these questions around vaccines and COVID not being as bad as blank. Jill, you want to get the next question?
Yeah, I got it.
Can I just?
Sorry, John?
I wanted to just quickly chip in on that. I think that part of the reason why that question comes up a lot is that we can't put a name to the face of so many people who have actually been affected personally by COVID. And then again, the symptoms of COVID are very bland in the sense that they are like the general symptoms of most viruses. And this, you have your fever, your weakness, your malaise, and all of a sudden the person crashes. So 80% of people who have COVID will recover, but that 20% can recover, and some of them might die, some of them might recover with very severe side effects. So it's a very serious thing. And I always say that people would have taken COVID more seriously if it's used to present like some of the viral hemorrhagic fevers like Lassa fever or Ebola, in which if you're coughing up blood, nobody needs to tell you to wear a mask. Yeah, so unfortunately, it's just the way it is. It's a virus that is so quiet but has caused so much havoc, and we really need to take it seriously because the deaths this year, last year alone, have been way above the national average in every country.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Julum. I think, for anybody that downplays this, there really are, and you could just take one look around this country or the world and see the toll that it's taken on most populations. But on to the next question, and not just most populations, but certain populations, certainly communities of color have been hit the hardest by COVID. But on to the next question, can we determine if there are negative reactions / effects if you take certain medications, such as for hypertension or anxiety? So anything with getting the vaccine and having certain medications and negative reactions when you combine the two.
So most vaccines for most chronic conditions, medications for most chronic conditions do not. We haven't seen any interference on a grand scale with the vaccine. The greatest area of caution is for those people that have had severe allergic reactions to a variety of things in the past. So that's where we need to take a lot of caution and monitor for a longer period of time, coordinate when and which vaccine is the best to get. But people on chronic medications for diabetes, hypertension, things of that nature, generally speaking, there's not an interaction that we've seen on a grand scale.
I guess the last question, now that vaccines are being rolling out currently to allied health schools, like I was able to get my vaccine on Monday, people 70 and older, do you think vaccines will be approved for children or 18 and younger anytime soon? And yeah, just response to that.
Go ahead, Dr. Julum.
Okay, so currently there are trials ongoing to see how the vaccines work in children. And the reason why children were not included initially in the vaccination program was because they were not included in the trial. So no one is going to give a child a vaccine when there haven't been trials on children. So ultimately, there will be, if the trials are done and they are successful, then the vaccines will be recommended for children.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there's always extra layer of care when it comes to pediatrics and any type of drug development and approval in children. So that's why you would not initially see children being approved for use of drugs and vaccines.
Thank y'all.
Alrighty. I hate to cut it, but we have to. I want to honor y'all's time and tonight, and it's just been such an impactful week, particularly for Black and Brown communities. We started with MLK Day and on Monday, and so we definitely wanted to have this webinar this week. I am so grateful to the scientists and health practitioners on this webinar. I'm grateful to Tony and Jill for helping. And we will put this recording on the YouTube, on the Facebook, as well as some other videos that will be helpful around deciding and having the tools you need to decide whether or not to get the COVID vaccine. Thank y'all so much, and have a great night and a great weekend.